Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give that a few minutes while all of the attendees are joining in. Excellent. We'd like to welcome you today to the Personnel Development Grant Program, the program area meeting, part of the 2022 OSEP Leadership and Project Directors Conference. If we can have the next slide, please. As part of the conference, I'm sure you've seen our disclaimer before, but the contents of the presentation were developed by the presenters for the 2022 OSEP conference. However, these contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. During today's event, you are going to be in listen-only mode. However, you do have the option of entering any questions in the question and answer pod. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sarah Allen with the Office of Special Education Programs. Sarah?
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. So delighted to have this opportunity to meet at the end, what is coming to the end of a fabulous week. I've enjoyed the conference and I hope that you have as well. Maybe take a minute and drop into the chat as we're going along information about a session that you found particularly interesting or engaging, something you want to be sure that call attention to and encourage others to see. I'm the lead of the Personnel Development Program and accompanied today by some colleagues who also support the program. I want to thank everyone for their help in putting together our program area meeting. You can see on the next slide the purpose of today's meeting. We do have a program area meeting that's part of each conference with project directors. It's an opportunity to share information, to exchange ideas, and begin to address some of the issues that enhance project management as well as project outcomes. We have some business that we like to conduct during this meeting, so opportunities to share with you updates and some of the work that we've been doing. We also want to use this time to hear from you about the work that you're doing. So during the session today, we're a large group and we're not able to break into small groups for discussion or sit around a table and discuss like we might in person, but we do have a few opportunities where you can engage with today's presentation. Please use the chat to make a comment or ask a question. We're going to share a link where you can go to a Jamboard and follow along with the agenda, share ideas that are specific to those particular topics as we address them. There you can ask questions, make a comment, even suggest ideas for follow-up, and I'll talk about that more as we go along. And finally, after today's meeting, we always encourage you to reach out to your project director and continue the discussion. Again, ask questions, share information and ideas, and we'll be working together over the year and years ahead to not only enhance the performance of your project, but to help collectively enhance the work of our program, the Personnel Development Program. On the next slide, I want to share with you the agenda for today's meeting. We have a jam-packed agenda, and the time will go quickly, I'm sure. We would like to start by reporting on program performance. We'd like to share with you as well some of the department priorities that relate to personnel development and call out priorities that we're working on and how OSEP is advancing those priorities through the Personnel Development Program. We have put together a fantastic panel. I'm really excited to share with you a roundtable discussion where we talk about the intersectionality of race, language, and disability, and consider those topics relative to personnel development. So what does it mean for this program and our projects in particular? We're going to highlight some OSEP resources, and at the end, we have 3 things we'd like to have you talk about when you meet with scholars this fall. So let's go ahead to the next slide and jump into the program investments. I want to be sure that everyone here is aware that we've added some new program investments over the last several years. You're the project directors and co-project directors and key personnel on a grant project funded by PDP. And we have different types of investments. We have had for many years the personnel preparation programs, the 325D and the 325K, the 325H grants, where we are providing support to universities that are used to provide scholarships, pay for tuition, and other forms of support for individuals who are completing a degree in special ed, early intervention, or one of the related services outlined in IDEA. In recent years, we've also added program development grants. Those grants go to state departments of education or lead agencies, and they're intended to establish or expand a program, and then implement, evaluate, and begin to think about how do we sustain that type of investment in the state, in the District of Columbia, or one of the territories. We have national centers that I know you're familiar with, Cedar Center, ECPC, and IRIS, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later on. And then the personnel development program itself makes contributions we just call them other contributions. So there are other investments and work that we're supporting. I know that you're closely connected to the type of work you're doing. I wanted you to recognize that there are other investments that connect to your work as well. So the next slide, let's look at the measures. As we're trying to demonstrate the importance of the personnel development program, we are thinking of looking for descriptive data, and then we're looking for outcome data. So we're trying to demonstrate the performance of the program as a whole, all of the investments across the areas that I talked about just a minute ago. But we do that looking at and aggregating the results from your project performance. So be aware that we're thinking in terms of the fiscal agents, who's been funded, where is that funding happening? We're interested in understanding the scholars or the people who are being trained, the future special ed teachers, or sometimes it's leadership development for current special ed teachers. We're calling them the scholars. And we're looking at descriptive data in terms of demographics. We're also looking at impact data and outcomes when we think about the scholars' performance. Can they demonstrate their knowledge? Do they demonstrate their skills? And then finally, do they demonstrate changes in performance for the children with disabilities that they either are serving or will be serving? So we're looking also to consider and describe the children with disabilities, looking at different areas of disability, looking at the intensity of the need, and considering the outcome. So changes in learning or performance for the children who are being served. On the next slide, I'll share with you, when we're thinking of the impact, I showed you the map. So we're looking at reach in terms of the number of states where we have funding, the number of universities, and that's about 46, 47 states, DC, and several territories. We have universities in all of those states, state departments, like I said, and lead agencies. We're also looking at impact when we think of the multiplier effect is what we're calling it. So we're reporting out and encourage you to think also about the impact in terms of the scholars, but also in terms of the personnel they prepare, and then finally in terms of the children that they serve. On the next slide, I listed here for you to see the program performance measures that are approved by the department and by the Office of Management and Budget. These are the measures that the program is required to report on annually. And as a result, projects are reporting on these measures as well. We've done really well over the last year. You can see as a summary on the 5 measures, we met our target or exceeded the target on all but one. The one measure where we were close but not quite was on efficiency. The cost of education has really gone up. When we look more closely, we break these measures and the performance apart by grant program to try to better understand what the results are telling us. And we will be recording a webinar and having a more in-depth discussion with projects on the performance measures, the program outcome, and then considerations for your project. So watch for information about that in the future. Be thinking about the measures as they align to your project. And we look forward to the discussion about your performance and how we can enhance both project and program performance on these measures. On the next slide, I listed some of the questions that we have that we want to talk with you about. We're not going to take the time to do that today, but as you're looking at our program, our collective personnel development program results, and as you're thinking about your project results, let's stop and ask ourselves some of these questions and then work together to enhance performance. So I look forward to sharing more information with you about that as the new academic year begins. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Sun-Young Ahn. Sun-Young is going to share with us some information and updates on the department priorities. And then also on the next slide, you can go ahead on the department priorities, and then she'll talk a little bit about OSEP's priorities as well. Sun-Young, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sun-Young Ahn, as Sarah introduced, and I'm a project officer in the Division of Research to Practice at OSEP. It is my great pleasure because personnel development is my passion area, and it's in my portfolio. It's a great pleasure to spend this time with our 3 to 5 personnel development project directors. I want to kind of reflect with you all on some common things we heard in the last couple of days during the conference. Next slide, please. So you see what our secretary really emphasizes throughout all our investments from the Department of Education, and also through our leadership plenary session yesterday, the policy session in the afternoon yesterday, and other large group sessions in the last 2 days. You all probably heard the urgency of the personnel shortage problems and the importance of our investment in personnel development. Personnel shortages are everywhere throughout the birth through 21 systems. We know that. We hear that National Guard troops are going into schools as substitute teachers. We also hear that parents of children with disabilities are being asked to serve as substitute teachers in classrooms. And we know that personnel shortages were there before the pandemic, but the pandemic exacerbated the problem very quickly. And at this point, as the secretary and the OSEP director and our assistant secretary said yesterday, what we do and what every one of you does matters. And there is no easy fix to the personnel challenges we are facing, but we know that we need to be thoughtful as we try to rebuild the systems, and it will take time and all of our efforts. So let's take a look at what specific priorities the department and OSEP are working towards. Next slide. So as you can see here, our department and OSEP are committed to equity in education and personnel development. And this is a natural priority for us as we recover from the pandemic. We know that the economic, health, and educational challenges did not impact children and families the same way across the racial and social economic strata. We also saw the same patterns in higher education institutions. And if we are really committed to diversifying the field, we have to work aggressively to reach out to diverse scholars to attract them to our field. And also try to support them so they can finish their program and become valuable part of our workforce. Diverse scholars who are oftentimes first-generation scholars may experience unique challenges in higher education, such as cultural isolation, financial burdens, and etc. So we ask all of you, think of new ways to keep them engaged and help them feel that they belong to the programs and your institutions. I also have to talk about the linguistic diversity when we talk about equity. One of the fastest growing populations in the US is multilingual learners. And we also know that this group was impacted during the pandemic disproportionately in accessing education and special education. So our department and OSEP will be paying more attention to how our funded projects address the needs of multilingual learners with disabilities and their families through our training grants. Authentic family engagement should be a foundational driving force for all of our personnel development projects. I know that there already exist great programs among our funded projects that engage families in their advisory board and also class seminars. So if you are doing that already, please continue doing what you're doing and also think of new ways to engage families and learn from them. We understand that accomplishing all these priorities require partners within and outside the field. We know it from our experience of collaborating with the HHS, Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, or the Department of Labor for our important initiatives. So we really encourage you to build coalitions across disciplines and universities and build partnerships with your local education agencies or state education agencies to make a lasting impact. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but thanks for reflecting on our department priorities with me. And let's shift gears a little bit and move on to our roundtable discussion. So the topic of our discussion today is the intersection of race, language, and disability. What does it mean for personnel development? Next slide. And to help our roundtable discussion, we have 4 expert panelists with us today, and I am going to have Sarah introduce each one of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Sun Young. You know, I'm really delighted with the panel that I'm so happy that each one of you could join us today and have this opportunity to share your insights, your work, your experiences with our project directors. Each of you have your personal experiences that brought you to this place, and each of our panelists also has done work professionally in this space. As we think about the last couple of years and reflect on equity and the need to diversify the field, we also recognize, and we sometimes talk to the work that needs to be done to support children or even to support teachers. I wanted to elevate that conversation and have a chance to talk with our panelists about how we can advance this work through personnel development. And when I'm thinking of personnel development, I'm thinking broadly. We're thinking of personnel preparation, attracting people into the field and bringing them, preparing them for the roles ahead. We're thinking of the ongoing professional growth and learning that professionals engage in throughout their career, and then also leadership opportunities as people grow into their areas of expertise and begin to lead systems and prepare others. So join me in welcoming our panel. Dr. Ashley White is an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and also was an OSEP scholar. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Dr. Ben Gallegos. Ben, I'm sorry, I put on this slide, it still says University of Portland. Ben was an assistant professor at the University of Portland for the past 5 years and is making some career changes. So we'll look forward to hearing about your new affiliations and the work going forward. Dr. Ben also was an OSEP scholar, so on a 325D grant. And both Ben and Ashley had an opportunity to intern with us at OSEP one summer, and we can talk a little bit about those opportunities as well. Dr. Sina Skelton is a professor at Indiana University and Purdue University, Indianapolis. She's also the director of operations for the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center. I've known Sina for many years and respect and admire her work, as well as Dr. Tanika Green. Tanika is a professor in school psychology and counseling at San Diego State University. She's had a number of led some personnel development grants through the 325K program, and that's how I first met her, and has gone on to do work university-wide in leadership positions, preparing faculty and staff to support undergraduate and graduate students, and think about personnel development at the university level. So thank you all for joining us. I invite you to engage with our panel throughout this discussion by asking questions in the chat, making comments, and also use the Jamboard if you want to share ideas or comment related to the question. There's different pages in the Jamboard. One is about our priorities, which Sun Young just discussed. Another relates to the questions that we're going to talk about as a panel, and then some of the topics that follow. So please take a chance to open that up and engage with us in the conversation. But let's pretend we're all in person and sitting on a large stage or sitting around a table and having a chance to talk with our panelists. That's the way we're thinking of our roundtable discussion today. I'm going to start with each panelist and ask them to introduce themselves, and we'll get to know them a little better before we launch into our questions. So let's start on the next slide with Ashley. Ashley, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hi.
I met Ashley. Hi. We first met when Ashley was a doctoral student. You were at the University of Southern Florida and had come to OSEP one summer to do an internship with us. Introduce us, help us get to know you, Ashley, and tell us how you come to this topic.
So I come to this topic by way of teaching. Honestly, I guess you could even say I come to this topic by way of being a student, being in a public school system, P through 12, but my 15 years of teaching really ground the work that I do now. And now that I have had the privilege of being able to acquire a doctoral degree and investigate in ways that teachers often don't have the opportunity to do, I've been able to put together some of the foundational issues that really defined my job when I was in P through K and when I taught elementary school. And so again, that really grounds everything that I do. Sarah asked me to add some pictures to my slide that I thought described me. And, it speaks to the pandemic. I graduated a couple of years ago, or June of 2020, I think it was, when I defended my dissertation, but it wasn't until last December that I was actually able to officially celebrate and take pictures. And I still couldn't walk at my university, the University of South Florida. So my mom had a party for me at our house like literally on the driveway. And so these are some pictures from that event because it was really nice to be able to celebrate that. And these pictures represent some of the people that helped me graduate, right? Thank you. I see the little party hat. Yeah, it was really fun. On the bottom right hand corner are my major professors. I had two of them, and my dog who sat with me during the pandemic every day while I wrote my dissertation, and my mom and my brothers. So I think if nothing else, it just speaks to the fact that we've all been through a lot during the pandemic, and that it really does take a village to help us get where we want to be and to graduate. And as a note, OSEP has been part of that village, and interning at OSEP was one of the two best experiences of my doctoral program. And so I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to do that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I knew it was a good experience for us. We always benefit from the exchange of ideas when scholars come from universities all over the country, tell us what they're reading, what they're working on, ask good questions, thoughtful questions, but happy to know that it's meaningful to you in return as well. So Ashley, it looks like family I think it would be probably fair to say that family is an important influence in defining who you are and how you approach the topics of race, language, disability.
Yep, I would definitely say that. And again, after teaching for 15 years, especially if you have an opportunity to teach in the neighborhood where you grew up, which I did,
Oh,
your
that's
students become your neighbors and your family, and it gets all mixed up together in a very wonderful way. So I would definitely agree with you on that.
that's great. Okay, good. We'll look forward to talking further. Let's go to Ben. Ben, welcome, Ben. Ben is a graduate of the University of Central Florida, right?
Yeah, charge on, go Knights.
All right. I know I don't want to get my Florida universities mixed up because there's some rivalries there. So I want to be sure. Ben, tell us who you are and how you come to the discussion today, how you've shaped your own thinking, your skills, the work that you like to do.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Gallegos and my pronouns are he, him, his. And appreciate being part of this panel with esteemed colleagues. This is so exciting, so rejuvenating, and emotional at the same time, because I could relate a lot of what was just shared by Ashley. And congratulations on defending your dissertation. And so what you see in this picture is my hometown, Vado, New Mexico, Southern New Mexico, 575, formerly the 505. Anybody out there knows what I'm talking about? And so for me, coming into this, I'm on the shoulders of family members and community members who've, sorry, I get emotional, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing. But, I take education very seriously, and supporting those in the community, because those in the community also supported me as well. And think about my OSEP experience. So I'll go straight to the OSEP piece, because I had a chance to serve in the internship during the summertime. And it was the coolest moment when I was in this room where they were onboarding us, and many of us were serving different federal agencies, not just in the DOE. And each person would stand up and say their name and represent the town they were from. Like, I'm so-and-so from this city and from this town and this state. And it was like, whoa, I'm Ben from Vado, New Mexico. Woo. And it was exciting for me. And so for me, I always think, how do I leverage my experiences, my lens? It is personal to me, but how do I leverage that into the communities I represent? How do I leverage it in the communities I haven't met yet, and the demographics and the identities? And so for me, when I think of education, I think of people of all abilities. I think how unique we all are and how much we bring to the table. And I think about the OSEP piece so much, because if there's a way to talk to everybody that lives in those trailers that you see right there from a young age, and let them know there's opportunities, and there's agencies, and there's a Department of Education that writes out grants for universities, has to say how they're going to recruit you. Little did you know how you are highly sought out because of your uniqueness, because of what you bring to the table. And that picture of me, I'm a student teacher in 2007 right there. I know it's a couple of years back, but if I would have known what is written in 325D and 325K grants, I was like, whoa, you all are really reaching out to us. But I wonder how many of us are getting that message. And I wonder how many of us are having the deans shake our hands, coming to our community. How many of the presidents of the universities are walking into my roads, my dirt roads, and saying, hey, you're who we want. And so I carry that with me. And I love drawing strength from people from all backgrounds. I really do. And I'm just grateful to be here. Thank you.
Ben, thank you so much. So Ben went to the University of Portland in the Department of Special Ed, and now is looking for some new opportunities. So one of these days he'll let us know what which of his many great opportunities he selects. So it's nice to be sought after. So good luck, Ben.
Thank you. Quick shout out to Portland. Sorry. Quick shout out to University of Portland, by the way. Amazing place. I know I'm not there anymore, but amazing place. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. So I came from a small town myself. I grew up in Nebraska. And I think like Washington, D.C. seemed like a long ways away. And frankly, the University of Nebraska seemed like a long ways away. So I share with you that small town, the idea, I don't know, I'm curious to hear, but it's like the whole town raised me. Any parent who saw me on the street was free to stop and tell me, good job, knock it off, whatever, like, or tell my mom later. So raised by a community, and for me, public schools open doors. So I appreciate you sharing that. Dr. Sina Skelton, I know from my time in Cincinnati. Sina is doing some amazing work through the equity centers, which are funded out of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. Sina, introduce us, help us get to know you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm just so excited to be a part of this wonderful panel. And I echo and underscore everything that Ashley and Ben just shared. Again, I'm Sina Skelton, I'm the Director of Operations for one of the 4 federally funded Equity Assistance Center. My pronouns are her and hers, and I identify as a cisgendered Black African-American woman with a disability. I'm in my middle age. I gotta have to claim that now. I'm in middle age.
Right.
My hair is pulled back in a ponytail, and I wear sort of a dark color short sleeve top. What brings me to this to topic today is the work of equity and the work of ensuring that we have schooling environments that's inclusive, supportive, and appreciate and value difference in all of our wonderful forms and the way that we show up in this human experience is not only a professional priority of mine, but a personal one as well. I live, this is part of my lived experience. I was born with a disability. I entered, even they reveal my age now, but I entered my public K-12 experience in 1975. So those of you, of course, know the significance of that year for students with disabilities. And I've gone through personally all the different sort of iterations of public education of youth with disabilities. You can see here the 2 pictures that I chose to sort of represent my journey. Is my starting off. That picture of me on the left is me as a kindergartner, and did not know as a young child with a disability, Black girl with a disability. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, so in the 70s in Detroit, Michigan, and what that future was going to be for that little girl. And I received many messages along my own trajectory on what my future would be from a very supportive family and community that had a very aspiring vision for me, and some core educators throughout my personal experience as well. But I also faced educators who had a different idea of what my future would be, based on what they thought a young Black girl from Detroit with a disability, what that individual can grow up to be. And that's really what brings me to this work. What dreams do we have for all of our children? And how do those dreams then manifest? And so I have some statistics there on the right. I won't go through those statistics, but I put that on the slide to sort of articulate the pipeline, right? And the opportunities that I had to envision and see myself represented as a graduate of high school, see myself represented as a student in college and university, see myself represented in graduate programs, see myself represented in terms of the faculty members that I had and was exposed to, and then also as practitioners. And we can see the statistics there, right? And so what I want to bring to this conversation, and what brings me to this panel today, is to discuss the intersection of representation. Because when we talk about workforce diversity, often I think there's a conflation of diversity and race, and we think only about race. But I want us to broaden that concept of diversity and think about diversity in terms of all the various ways that we show up in this human experience. So race and language and religion and disability and gender identity and expression and sexual orientation and lived experiences and cultural backgrounds. And so to really broaden our understanding and concept of a diverse workforce, and also to think about that in terms of our intersectional representation. So I'm very happy to be here this afternoon and look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sina. You know, in selecting a title, we picked out a few keywords, but you were right. There are so many pieces to our identity that also belong in that title: religion, economics, geography, like East Coast, West Coast, I think is different. The central states in the middle. So there are many variables and experiences that define who we are and how we show up. So thank you for being here and being part of this discussion. I'm going to go on to Tanika, and then we'll get around to the broader discussion. Tanika, welcome. Dr. Green.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm honored to be a part of the panelists and to serve with all of my colleagues. I just want to say hello and thank you everyone for joining us. I am Tanika Duran Green. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I am the great granddaughter of Hannah Simpson Dye and Wesley Dye. I'm the great granddaughter of Evitas Dye Duran and Jimmy Duran, and the daughter of Ovitas Duran Cooper and Earl Claiborne. I am the niece of Belinda Duran, who had multiple disabilities and is the reason why I am doing this work. I'm the wife of Tori and the mother of a 17-year-old daughter named Tori Faith. I am an African-American woman. I'm from Generation X, born in the 70s. So Sina, we're the same around. I am a Christian. I'm a scholar leader. I'm a mentee. I'm a mentor. I am a professor of school psychology at San Diego State University with over 20 years experience in academia. I'm a grant writer and the associate vice president for campus and community affairs at SDSU. I'm committed to African-American student success and youth and foster care. My Myers-Briggs assessment said that I am an ISFTJ, and they call my personality type a defender. So I say all that to say that every piece and part of me is definitely who I am. It's every piece, and every piece is important to me. And acknowledging these pieces is how you understand me, how you value me, and all these things have shaped how I think about the intersectionality of race and language and disability. But it also shapes how I interact with my students and how I teach them and how I learn from them. And I can talk more about that. But in this slide that you see in front of you, on the left side, you see a magnolia. And in the center is a picture of me and my, and my granny, Evitas Dye Duran. So my granny died on November 3rd, 2021, way too soon at the age of 85. She was not ready. I'm going to tell you, she was very, very just full of life. But she and my aunt Belinda died in a house fire. But her last words to me were, "We are some singing sisters." And her favorite flower was a magnolia. So as you see that in the background. But what I found out was that magnolia flowers symbolize endurance and also perseverance. And that's what she instilled in me. So to the right, you see information about a program at SDSU called the Henrietta Goodwin Scholars Program that I directed from 2019 to 2021. And it's one of our signature pipeline programs, and that's run through the Black Resource Center. So Henrietta Goodwin was the first African-American to ever graduate from San Diego State University, and that was in 1913. They didn't allow her to participate in the graduation ceremony, but they could not deny her of her degree, something she rightfully earned and deserved. So she persisted, she persevered, and she succeeded. And so we use Henrietta Goodwin's story to share this with students at the university, that Henrietta mattered. Despite what others thought, she still mattered because she persisted, she persevered, and she succeeded in the midst of people who did not value who she was as a person and all the pieces of her. So this program is really a life support to our students. But when I bring those two pictures together, at the bottom, there's a picture of my OSEP, one of my OSEP grants called Project TLC, Trauma Leaders Consortium. And it brings together who my granny was. She was a former foster parent, a strong leader in the community, and also Henrietta Goodwin, who's striving to help students persevere and succeed. And so the grant really is about training personnel to improve outcomes for youth in foster care. But those three pictures really represent who I am and who I strive to be in the university.
That's amazing. You sort of introduced us to the next question, which is on the next slide. How do we take this conversation and find meaning for personnel development? So clearly, each of you has a story, your personal story that, and Tanika, you said it so eloquently, and someone else used the phrase, I stand on the shoulders of those that came before me, or talking about how a community surrounded you as well as a family. How do we take this discussion and these lessons into personnel development? What's our obligation? What's our opportunity? Ashley, you want to kick us off with thinking about why I don't know what it is and why it matters that we have this discussion in personnel development?
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity, Sarah. And much of what I'm going to say echoes what has already been said in the introduction of our panelists. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is that when we think about the intersection of race, language, disability, and all of the other categories that were mentioned, to define it is kind of, I don't know if it's a moot point, but because it changes, right? The way that we thought about it 10 years ago, if at all, isn't the way that we thought about it 5 years ago, certainly isn't the way that we're thinking about it now, particularly as we consider some of the socio-political context and some of the political difficulties that we are experiencing in education. For example, the censorship legislation. And while this conversation certainly isn't about that, it does impact the way that we conceptualize intersectionality and the degree to which we are able to discuss that in an informative and expansive way. I think something else that we have to consider when we consider intersectionality is the history of it all. And when I say history, there's a strong history between, in many other ways, but for me, in my research, investigating not only the intersectionality of race and disability, but the history between those two and the parallels that exist between not only the civil rights movement, but the disability movement. And in many ways, the way that the civil rights movement influenced the disability movement and the fact that we don't have that conversation. Something else that we have to consider is the inception of special education and its original design, and how its original design, although I am an advocate of special education and taught special education for over a decade, still being aware that some of our foundational principles were set up in a way that disenfranchised students from the very beginning, right? And so you have that intersectionality of Brown v. Board 1954, and then the subsequent decision of 1955, and this conundrum about what majority white, affluent, middle-class families were going to do with this, and ways to continue to segregate students and really mire the landscape of disability. Because as we know, disability is a thing, it is a reality, but it again has been mixed up in some of these very detrimental and vile intentions that have made special education. It contributes, the history contributes in many ways to some of the issues around disproportionality that we face now. And I think when we think about language and we think about immigration, again, think about the political context, those are some of what we have to consider, particularly in personnel development, because these considerations are what make or break the robust nature of personnel development, right? And what we are producing, and producing the kinds of scholars that are able to talk about this in an influential way, able to talk about it in an expansive and an accurate way. There's a quote, and this is a comment around language, you know, we think about the conflation of language and disability as well. And there's a quote that I love, and this is in a personal context for me, and it relates to some of the work that I did in teaching majority Black students in a majority Black neighborhood where I still live when I'm home in Florida. But Dave Chappelle said that every Black American is bilingual, and all of us, right? But we speak street vernacular and we speak job interview. And I think that speaks to, it's a funny quote, but it really is.
It's true.
Right. And when we talk about this idea of looking at intersectionality from a broad lens, which was already mentioned, we have to think about these very nuanced matters, right? The way that language shows up, not only in actual differences in the languages that students speak, but in the dialect that is spoken even within English, right? When we think about intersectionality, we also have to consider that, you know, for me, I show up as a cisgendered Black African-American female, but there are other identities that I have that sometimes actually outweigh that given the context, right? Disability included. And so we have to think about what intersectionality means as a construct, as scholars, how we want to make sure that our future scholars understand that and make sure that they can dissect that in a way that's individualistic for the people that will come after them and the students and pre-service teachers that they will be working with.
I'm going to pause and see if anyone wants to jump in and build on what Ashley said. I might invite Sina to share with us on the next slide some of the thoughts that you put down as you were.
Yeah,
that,
sure. I'm sorry, Sarah.
Does that fit as a next?
Yeah. I think, you know, just building on what Ashley just shared in terms of the history of understanding intersectionality as a analytical framework to think about the ways in which those of us, and all of us do, right, have multiple identities, and how all of us embody identities that are both simultaneously privileged in some contexts, but also marginalized in others, right? And how we think about then combating intersectionality with applying an intersectional approach to thinking about the way in which we analyze, advocate, and then put in place interventions to address those barriers, those overlapping, intersecting, and oftentimes compounding systems of oppression that can be obstacles to diverse individuals who possess multiple marginalized identities from actually entering into the teaching field, the educator field, right? So we talked about earlier on, and this whole conversation is about the fact that we're in the midst of a educator shortage. And even more so when we think about educators who possess and embody minoritized identities, we don't have the representation. So our student population, our student demographic are not reflected in our educator population. And how do we move towards having a more representative teaching and educator workforce along all of the roles, right? From classroom teachers to building level principals to superintendents to related service personnel in terms of diversity across the multiple layers and levels of the system. So what I think about this idea of broadening our understanding of workforce diversity along that sort of educator pipeline, we need to start, you know, it's sort of like that analogy. We have to start with the tree in terms of realizing the fruit of that tree or that apple. So, you know, so we want, if our end outcome is to have a more diverse educator workforce, we have to go to the root of it. And the root of it is, how are we supporting our students with multiple marginalized identities in our K-12, pre-K-12 system first? How do we take an intersectional approach to thinking about breaking down those barriers towards accessing rigorous, supportive, culturally responsive K-12 learning experiences, right? So that we are graduating students with disabilities at the intersection of language diversity, at the intersection of racial diversity, at the intersection of diversity in terms of religion and national origin. How are we thinking about breaking down those barriers so that we are graduating more students? And then our second sort of layer then is to think about what are we doing to break down those barriers and also create on-ramps so that those students are entering our university, college and university programs, so that they can become a part of that future talent pool that we can then pull from in terms of bringing into our schools and our school communities. And so this slide sort of illustrates the three different buckets that we need to sort of leverage as we think about dismantling those systemic barriers. So that first bucket, and it's the, if you're looking at the slide or you're imagining the slide, it is the square off to the far left, and it reads intersectional analysis. And what that means is that when we're looking at our data, when we're looking at who's graduating from our schools, from our K-12 systems, who's entering our college and universities, who's not only entering, but then are able to persist and then graduate from our universities, and even going on to graduate programs or entering into the teaching field. Are we looking at data to help us better understand who these students are, what their experiences are, and are we looking at our data through an intersectional lens? So not only looking at the percentage of, let's say, students with disabilities that are entering our college and universities, but students with disabilities at the intersection of race. So what about our students with disabilities in our college programs who are also minoritized by race, right? Are we looking at, and then when we're advocating for students, when we're advocating for increasing the population of students who are graduating and graduating with high school diplomas that will enable them to actually enter into a college university or entering into a community school environment, are we advocating in an intersectional way? Again, not only advocating for students in terms of racialized difference or diversity or language diversity, but at the intersection of race and language, right? At the intersection of race, language, and disability or gender. So again, looking at the whole person, right? And then when we're putting together programs and interventions and supports to increase the population of our students that are graduating from our K-12 programs, that are entering into our college and universities, that are supported through making it through our college and universities and graduating and not graduating with a lot of debt, but graduating so that they can afford to have a livelihood that will enable them to actually enter into the teaching field until we increase our salary that we're paying our teachers, right? Many of our young people that are graduating college and universities who may want to enter the teaching field are not doing so because they can't afford to, because the debt that they're accumulating through their program, and then also the salaries that teachers make, particularly new teachers make. And you think about that on top of the additional cost of living for minoritized students in terms of race, in terms of disability, right? And so we're thinking about then, okay, what are those programs that we can put in place? Are we again taking our intersectional approach, not only in terms of supporting our students with disabilities, but supporting our students with disabilities who again may be from a minoritized, racialized background, or language difference, or economic difference. And so this really causes us to address the complexity of the issue and the nuance of the issue, and to broaden our understanding of that, sort of creating that pipeline in order to really increase our educator workforce.
So Tanika, Ben, even Ashley, you're all professors as well with, OSEP related grants. How do you take, I'm thinking of Sina's work that she laid out is so important, Sina, absolutely. And as a professor, how do you elevate that to the graduate program now? Is it possible to do parallel? So we may not have as many students now as we would like to have in the future, but we do have students, and being able to, so I have two questions, and on the next slide is one of them. How do we build the capacity of current, people who are in grad school now, or maybe faculty who are our colleagues, to take that approach? So now at the university level, the people, or grad school, thinking of, for OSEP scholars, we have doctoral students, master's students. How do we help them in their own journey, number one, but also help them prepare to work with kids in the way that you just described when they are in classrooms or in the learning environments where kids are? Shanika, is that something you and your colleagues have thought about?
Yeah, absolutely. And they were thinking about it before I was there. So I do want to give a shout out to SDSU and the school psychology program, because they were really intentional about, one, bringing in and recruiting students who have this hard work and passion for working in this multicultural realm. But then they also, put time and effort into making sure that that was through the curriculum in our fieldwork experiences, and also shape the grants that SDSU works with. But I think one of the most important things too is the mentoring that happens, and that, I think, shapes the experiences of the teachers and or the students in the program, and allows them to continue on, right? And that's that advocacy piece that Sina mentioned too, that the mentorship within that program and across the university shapes who our students are and who they can be. And so, for example, we have an African American mentoring program where the students get connected to faculty members and also staff members across the university. That program is now connected to our Black Resource Center. We have cultural centers on campus where our students can tap into, so that whatever identity you identify as, they have a connection there. So it's not just that they're in our program, but then they're also reaching across levels across the university to connect with folks who look like them, who understand who they are, who show value in who they are, and who invite them into spaces where normally they wouldn't be invited into. So I think it's that piece around intentionality about the programs that you're creating, but also the mentoring that needs to happen throughout the program and beyond.
And Ben, I didn't know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize, Ashley.
No. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, mine's pretty brief. Just some of from my lens and my experience. University of Portland. I am no longer at University of Portland, but seriously, amazing university. They brought me in. I appreciate them. Shout out Dean Watsky, Associate Dean Bruce Weitzel, amazing people. But they allowed me to say, hey, do we have a home scholar program through AACTE? A program that specifically serves mentorship and much more frameworks that it's hard to describe, but it's to support students who identify as racially and ethnically diverse, scholars who are preparing, either already in the field or preparing to enter academia. And this network through the Home Scholar Program through AACTE was something that the university at the time, I said, hey, honestly, Jacqueline Rodriguez through AACT reached out to me and said, hey, there's no Home Scholar Program in the Pacific Northwest, and I know you're a Holmes alum. And she called me out and she said, let's roll. And I said, let's do it. And so Home Scholar Program at the University of Portland, I could tell you that university was fully supportive. And so that mentorship and that capacity building, supporting educational equity, that was a team. That was a squad. I mean, you join a team, you join a network, you got people to lean on. So I think about that mentorship that was able to be brought onto the University of Portland, and then network onto other scholars who are out there, not just nationally, but internationally as well. But having folks to lean on and bringing in your lens and combining with other lens, and iron sharpens iron.
Ashley.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if we had time. I just wanted to
So we
lift up.
are, I think our planned agenda, we're going to adjust a little and go because we're already, the best of intentions, but this is too good to stop. So let's just go with the flow and we'll jump ahead a few slides whenever. So I want you guys to feel free to jump in.
Okay, I'll be quick. I just wanted to piggyback off of something that Tanika mentioned, and when she talks about her centers that are geared towards Black students, right? And I don't say that. What that speaks to is specificity and the ways in which people who are diverse, there is intersectionality, but in no way are any of us a monolith, right? And so having centers and having spaces that not only recognize diversity, diverse groups, but the individuality within those, right? Experiences of individuals who may be first generation or who are immigrants or or children of immigrants. And there are so many ways in which diversity exists. And so to the degree that we can, we have to consider not just the needs of diverse students, but the varying needs of diverse students, right? I think the other part too is thinking about how we build culturally responsive and responsible doctoral programs, much in the way that we think about that in P through 12 education is the way that we could be thinking about it in doctoral preparation as well. And also not forgetting that oftentimes not all of our faculty members are versed in this topic, and that's okay, but finding ways to make sure that not only are we on the same page in terms of what we want to present to students, but we're on the same page internally in terms of what we understand and how we want our programs to proceed.
I just want to just really quickly connect to, Ashley, I think you made this point, and also Tanika, around the importance of that mentoring. And I want to also bring in the importance of networking and connecting to organizations within our universities and also outside within our communities. When we talk about building the capacity, and Ashley, you just surfaced that, that expertise may not be presently may not be among some of the faculty in university around how to best support their students, right, from different racially minoritized backgrounds or minoritized backgrounds in terms of other identities as well. And it's not really incumbent upon each and every one of us to have all the answers, because you don't have to individually have all the answers. But what strengthens us and what helps us build capacity is the extent to which we're connecting and networking with each other and surfacing and highlighting and amplifying the voices and perspectives of those who may have that experience, may have that expertise, may have that understanding. And so the extent to which we can, tap into community groups or professional organizations that may also have a committee or a work group or an affinity group that's focused on a particular community, right? That we can tap into and bring those connections in to help then build the capacity. And so when we think about, I'm also a school psychologist by training. That's how Sarah's actually my advisor in my program. So that's how I come to this work as well. So we think about the association, the National Association of School Psychologists, is there a work group, a committee that's focused on school psychologists who are Latinx or who are African American or who have disabilities that we can connect to and build on? So expanding our networks of support helps us then expand and build our capacity as well.
Sarah, can I mention one other thing? I know we're short for time, but if I don't,
I already adjusted on the other end, so I'm giving you mine. Go ahead.
I have to say this, and in order to pour into the students, you have to make sure that your faculty are ready to pour into those students. So if they're not versed on the topic, they need to get with the program. Because if you bring in students into your program who are from diverse backgrounds and communities, and you want them to succeed in your program, then you have to be about that business. You have to understand the assignment, and the assignment is not only to be, not only to understand who our students are, but to also move them through the program so that they understand who they are as those professionals. They already know who they are personally, but when they come into your program, it's an addition to not only who they are, but who they are as those professionals. So faculty members can't say that it's inconvenient to, be and time consuming to commit to this work. We don't get to choose which parts of our students, we want to recognize and value. And then when it's convenient for us, then, we shout out. But I think it's important that programs need to recruit faculty and staff who understand that assignment and who are committed to that work.
So many topics have come up in the last little discussion that I want to call out. One is that, we've talked a lot in the last couple of years about attracting and recruiting scholars from diverse backgrounds into our programs, but Tanika raises the really important point, as do others. There's work to be done in the preparation too. So I've heard programs talk about, we changed our curriculum, we modified readings, we had to do work to prepare our field supervisors. We've, maybe found field placements in different areas. We've covered different topics. So that is something I'd love us to think more about as a program across the next year. Another is, like Tanika, you sort of made mention of not only helping, so they know who they are as a person, but who are you as a professional? And as you graduate and leave the program, are you ready to be the leader in the field? And how do we prepare people to now go and advance the work with the different group of teachers and providers? So if you're future faculty, are you ready to join as a faculty member and to have, contribute to a new program in this way? If you're going into school as a school psychologist, are you ready to have this discussion with your colleagues and with your parent, with the families you work with, so that idea of, first of all, building their capacity in the role they're taking on, but also building their capacity to lead and advance change. And there was one other one, but I've lost that. Oh, the other one I wanted to mention was that, I love that you've all mentioned the importance of networking and connecting with others. And sometimes that happens within a program or on a campus within your university. Sometimes it doesn't. I think what's unique about this particular community that we call PDP is that we bring people together from different, what I would call disciplines, school psychology, OT, PT. We have adapted physical education. We have special ed teachers. We have people who are, really working in early intervention and early childhood. So we have a chance to sort of move and have those conversations and network across universities, across programs, and even with a wider audience. Seems benefit to me in each of our fields advancing the work instead of each of us sort of having our own silo. It's funny how we put ourselves into silos in so many different ways. I'm going to give you all a chance to add a last comment, and then we're going to move on to some other, probably less exciting, but important business and sharing. I'm not going to do questions 2 and 3 necessarily in a formal way, but let's just take a chance, or 3 and 4. Let's just take a chance to think about, I don't know, thoughts you want to share. I shared with you the 3 or 4 things that really stuck out to me in this conversation that I'd love to follow up on. What are the ones you would like to talk more about?
I was going to share just some sort of considerations, but Ashley, you went off mic, so I didn't know if you were wanting to speak.
Sina, I will defer to you and then I will speak after you. That is perfectly fine. It's kind of like this double Dutch, right?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah, but please go ahead and then I'll jump in after you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You can maybe advance the slide if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So I just wanted to sort of close just in terms of addressing and answering your question, Sarah, in terms of what else to share, and just to kind of you know, I know people are listening and like, okay, this is all wonderful and it's a great, engaging, dynamic conversation, but so what, you know, where do I start and what do I do? And so I think these are just sort of four, I think, first steps, right, that organizations can take, whether you are SEA, an LEA, an IHE, or a you know, supportive community-based organization, and or an individual, right? So first, it's just really to acknowledge that people with multiple intersecting identities. None of us is just one thing, right? We're all we embody multiple identities, multiple cultural histories and practices, and that should be acknowledged. We should all be able to bring our whole selves into any space and have our whole selves recognized and valued. And so we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge the multiple intersecting identities that we all have, and acknowledging that, demonstrating in very overt ways an appreciation and valuing of those multiple identities. We want to seek information regarding, in terms of our students and our educators that are currently in our schools and school communities, but seek information about the challenges that our students are experiencing, right? What are those challenges? And how do we learn more about those challenges? How do we learn more about the barriers that are keeping maybe our students from graduating from our universities, or keeping our students from actually entering into the educator field, or keeping our educators, our new educators from advancing? And so understanding those challenges, but also recognizing that that it's important to honor and value the assets as well, right? And so there's joy. There's joy in the identities that we carry. Even those identities that are marginalized and historically minoritized, you know, I appreciate and honor and love all of the identities that I embody. I proudly identify as a person with a disability. For me, disability is a part of my identity. It is not a deficit. I understand and I learn and I understand the history of my disability community. So when Ashley talked about sort of the history of the disability rights movement and justice and the intersection with the civil rights movement, that's a part of who I am, a part of my understanding that I bring, and to honor and recognize the assets that all of our students bring, particularly our students who have been historically and contemporarily marginalized. We so often characterize the sort of challenges and almost with a deficit lens, and we don't recognize the joy. We don't recognize the assets. We don't recognize the wonderfulness, if that's a word, of embodying different identities. That yes, there are challenges, but that we are not challenged because of our identities. We are challenged because of the way society chooses to address those different identities. And so to seek information and amplify not only the challenges, but also the assets that people bring. And that third point I want to bring out is then to assist our students and educators in finding those resources, right, to address any barriers that they may be experiencing and accessing opportunities related to their identities, right? Find those mentors, find those community-based organizations or those networks of support. Seek information that will help our students address and interrupt microaggressions that they may be experiencing, address macroaggressions that are out there, and to really create space and opportunity for individuals to really inform us as organizations, again, whether we are talking about SEAs, LEAs, or IHEs, how they can be a part of articulating the issue, but also investing and informing what those solutions are. And then lastly, I think it's important to recognize that there are differences in risks associated with our students and our educators intersecting identities, right? And so when we think about often the burden of addressing issues of discrimination, the burden of addressing those macro or microaggressions often lie on those individuals who embody those marginalized identities. And it is incumbent upon our allies. It's incumbent upon those of us who possess privileged identities to not only operate as allies, but really operate as accomplices to actively dismantle those barriers alongside those of us who may be confronted with barriers and systemic oppression that may be barring us or preventing us from accessing the workforce, right? And so for me, these sort of four, major kinds of actions that we can engage in can really help pave a smoother road for increasing our workforce.
Sarah, do I?
Well said, Sina. Really helpful I like the move to action sort of way that you've captured that. Yeah, Ashley, your turn.
Oh, okay. I just want to proffer up 3 things for brevity. The first is that in the way that we are seeking to, and Tanika intimated this, if not directly said it, but in the way that we are focused on recruiting diverse students, we have to be intentionally focused around recruiting diverse faculty. And when I say diversity, I mean that in an expansive way. But in addition to recruitment, we have to be as committed to keeping them, because oftentimes diverse faculty will come to institutions and they don't always stay. And so I have watched that happen at my own institution since I've been there going into my 3rd year. But I also just want to proffer up the importance of mentorship and intentional mentorship. And I mentioned OSEP as my, think of many people in OSEP as my professional and academic and even personal family, because not only did I develop relationships with individuals at OSEP while I was there, I have them now, and they have been supportive in all of the things that I have done. And I think it's so important to remember that as Sina puts it, our minoritized groups, our marginalized students, and whatever way you want to think of them, we don't come to these places and spaces with the same kind of knowledge and the same kind of access, right? And so were it not for my entrance into a doc program began with somebody saying to me, are you interested, right? And that is a person that I still, Dr. Hoppy, he's at UNF, but he's such an important part of everything that I do. And so I think we have to be very intentional about thinking about our diverse students and making sure that they're getting the opportunities, or that they know about the opportunities that exist. I didn't even know in any of my 15 years of teaching that OSEP even existed, right? And so we have to think about the funds of knowledge that minoritized students, we just don't have because of the historic way that our society has been set up. And also remember that if you are not a person who identifies as a minoritized or marginalized group, that allyship is so, so important, right? And so we have to think about ways that we can support if we are not in that marginalized group. And many of the opportunities that I have received and have been able to maximize have been through the work of allies who recognize where I sit in terms of privilege and access and have worked very hard to change that. And so just wanted to lift those few items up.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, time's running short. Anybody final words? Tanika? I might
I'm trying to defer to Ben because I know he's been so.
I know, Ben.
I'm just here like, oh my gosh, this is recorded, right? Yes. Honestly, I'm telling you, I am soaking this up. This is amazing. I will speak directly to actionable items that I said to myself, exactly what, how do I get this in the hands? How do I teach people OSEP? I literally have joined a network. Well, I didn't join the network, but in the state of Oregon, where I was coming from, I'm now in Central Florida. This is where I live, right outside of Orlando. I apologize for the city I'm in right now. It's beautiful. St. Cloud. I'm in St. Cloud, Florida now, but I was in Oregon. And so there was a nonprofit group that created a college and career group to speak to middle school and high school students who identified as Latinx. And so they had this statewide initiative where they brought students in to hear from college career professionals in different fields. And I said, this is where I'm going to do a session on OSEP grants. I'm going to bring in middle school and high school kids, and I'm going to tell them, look at this 325 grants, 325D grants. And I broke it down for them. I said, this is how we contact project directors from these universities. This is how we send an email and say, hey, you know what? I want to be a speech language pathologist. I want to be a special education teacher. I want to be a faculty member. And I said, I need to start recruiting at the middle school, high school level. And by the way, if I talk to pre-K kids, I'll find a way. So that's what I had done. I had done sessions where I straight up say, here's, first of all, here's the pamphlet for our university. We'll recruit you, but pick a place. I got your back, reach out to me, and let me teach you about OSEP. And then in the courses that I taught at the university from the undergraduate to the graduate level, we spent sessions where we were reviewing the different grants that existed and the funding. And so I just wanted to make OSEP more tangible for a lot of folks that I believe if they knew about it way ahead of time, and maybe it sparked that interest that they've had about being an educator and following their passion. Maybe it's a spark that they said, hey, hold on, I didn't realize this. And then to know about the funding piece and the mentorship. So I just wanted to make sure to share that out loud. And that's just something that I said I'm going to take on. And to this day, anybody I run into, we stayed in a hotel driving down to Orlando, Florida. And the person who was checking me out was a preschool teacher. And we started talking, and I said, hey, I'm in education. And guess what I told her about? OSEP. I said, guess what? OSEP. Look up the state you're in, look up the state you want to live in, reach out to project directors. You got to let them know you're aware of it. The opportunities there, and just any way we could serve the children, the students, the families, the communities. That's some of the work that I've been doing.
That's great. I love how people are intervening at different levels. Some of it is like at the young student level where you're talking to, Ben, you were talking to kids and telling them about opportunities and career paths, talking to teachers, or Ashley, you used the example where we're still learning and growing and making those connections. So I'm going to leave it to Tanika for the last couple comments on maybe how programs can share with us your last few comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
I just wanted to add a piece about what institutions can do, because the systemic piece is so important. And so one of the things that institutions can do is focus on their strategic plan and make sure that that strategic plan highlights the importance of recruiting and supporting students, but also graduating them. And then hold programs accountable to, really addressing those strategic plans. And if they don't, then maybe their budget is a little tight the next year, but I know that that's controversial. But the second piece is do some cross-department collaboration. So as faculty members, we don't often think that we can use our enrollment services folks and staff, and also our admission staff, to help with our recruitment of our graduate programs, or even use research to build bridges, right? So enrollment services and admissions, they have data that we can use for our programs to help to understand how to recruit students. And then the third thing is the cluster hires. So universities should be devoted to hiring clusters of faculty members from diverse backgrounds and using that as a catapult to recruit other students. But in order, like Ashley mentioned, you have to keep them there. So you can't recruit them and then just leave them out there. But the other piece is that the allyship piece that I like what Ashley said, and then moving it further to co-conspirator, right? So yes, you're my ally. Yeah, you can cry with me and you can be there for me, but I want you to conspire with me. I want you to do research around issues related to things that support who I am and what I research. So those are the three things that I think institutions can do.
Well, thank you. I told you all when we started, this is a fabulous panel. And I'm always in awe of each and every one of you. I learn from you, I learn with you, and I hope coming together that we've been able to spark a conversation that we can continue. so we can be co-conspirators and continue to make the world a better place. You know, I think when I was a little kid, I thought everybody's experience was just like mine, right? I remember having dinner at a friend's house and thinking, oh, weird, that's not how we have dinner, because I didn't really know otherwise. And so as you begin to learn who you are and how you fit into the space where you live, and then into the larger world and the larger world, and I heard each and every one of you, in my experience too, as others were so important. Valerie talked earlier about how families, engaging families in helping figure out expectations and planning for their children. That's so important. Building community connections, if that's through networking on campus or in a broader world, understanding communities and the role that they play. And then thinking about moving it forward. So building your capacity. I mean, we're all in the business of building the capacity of others. That's what personnel development is about. So if you're building the capacity of scholars, being intentional and thinking about the opportunities provided, the information, but it also comes to this, you know, I stood on the shoulders of others, and I want others to stand on my shoulders and move it forward. There's work to do that we don't even imagine yet. So I don't know what that will be, but I hope it's, we're building on our past and not recreating it. I'm going to ask that we move ahead to slide number 38. So join me, everyone, in thanking this amazing group. And I look forward to continued conversations and collaborations. Sorry, okay, 39, I added a slide, so the next one. You know, we have planned some other information that we'd like to share, and that was what we skipped by, are some resources that are available through OSEP funded investments that would help advance work in personnel development related to race, language, culture, gender. So thinking about how we can continue to advance the conversation, I encourage you to check out the OSEP funded centers and the many resources they have related to the topic and the discussion we've just had. And I'll send some of them out to you in the next week or so as well. I wanted to sort of end on this one. We only have a couple minutes left. You know, we do have interns that come in the summer. We go to conferences, or we did back in the day, right, where we have a chance to interact with faculty and scholars. And as I meet people who are the project directors and sometimes the recipients of scholar support, they don't always know where their funding comes from. So like Ben, I'm joining Ben in letting people know about OSEP funded grants. And what I really ask is that you help your scholars understand that they're OSEP scholars, that they are working on a project with Dr. Green, project teams or project TA or project whatever it is. You all come up with very, very clever names when you submit your grant applications. And students identify with them, but let them know they're OSEP scholars. And the two reasons why, I think one is it enters them into a network with others, with faculty and scholars all over the country, at universities in your state, not only those on the project that they're working with, but those working on other projects at that university in your state and across the country. So find out who else has OSEP funding in your state and convene those important players. Let's talk about, you know, if we fund SPDIGs that are doing professional development around Check and Connect. I want to know who's teaching that at the university level. So we're teaching the same things and speaking the same language as a way to leverage our resources, but help scholars know they're part of that network and benefit from it. The other is it's a fabulous opportunity to talk with them about policy and about funding and about practice. So I'm not suggesting you lobby, but you help them understand the systems that are supporting the work that's providing that support. It's always helpful to know how your position is funded or how the program that you hope to operate might be funded. So it's a perfect opportunity to talk with them about congressional appropriations and funding of projects. And this is one source of funding. There's others available. So in the next year, I hope we can really help scholars add to their identities that they're OSEP scholars. So the next slide, there is a student-led group. There were some doctoral scholars who wanted to connect with other people, with other scholars at universities, and they started their own group. I think we introduced it last year, but I want to raise your awareness and encourage you to engage as faculty and encourage your scholars to join as well. It's a student-led group loosely affiliated with OSEP. We share resources. We help them find speakers, but they do networking events. They've organized research groups. They've had career fairs where they talk about, you know, in the first few years, experiences to build your vita, and in the last year or so to how to look for jobs and interview. So a really powerful network, and I want to support them in getting the word out. You can subscribe to their listserv. As you're posting things about your work, use the hashtag at OSEP Scholars. Call attention and let people know that you're part of that network as well. All right, I'm going to move us to the last slide. We have some, you know, at the OSEP Ideas that work. There's lots of resources, and we'll come back and talk about that again. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank those who presented today. Thank those who helped with the preparations, and thank everyone who was here for the discussion. We look forward to the work ahead. And I forget who said it early, maybe it was Sun Young. This is my passion place to higher ed and personnel development. So thank you for your work and leadership, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate. To our esteemed speakers and panelists, thank you. Fabulous. So I join in the applause and wish you all the rest of the summer goes well. Take a few minutes and fill out the evaluation. Give us some feedback. Jot your thoughts down on the Jamboard so we can follow up and stay in touch. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Oh, I'll mention at 3:30, I think there's a listening session if you want to participate and think about the resources just released from the department on discipline. So I hope you have that information and will join us then too. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.